Okay, this is, I'm Mike Bonin. Actually, I'm not Mike Bonin. I'm just dressed like him today. I'm Gil Cedillo, Chair of the Housing Committee, and I'm joined up here by my colleague, Paul Krikorian, Chair of Budget and Finance. We have a joint committee hearing today, or what we call a conference committee in our other role. And so we're here to talk about the issues related to housing and the foreclosures, the registry, and the appropriate use of fines that have been accumulated, and a whole range of other topics that are important to the city as we try to move forward from the recession and make sure that we do all that we can to prevent foreclosures and to make sure that foreclosures are not become blight, and to think about strategies and plans to improve the quality of life for all Angelenos. Mr. Chairman, do you have any other comments? I'm ready to start.
No, I want to thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for including budget and finance in this discussion and for your leadership in driving this issue forward. I know this has been a source of great frustration for many in Los Angeles that we have the double detriment of foreclosures happening in our neighborhoods, but also the blight that comes when those foreclosures are not properly maintained by the financial institutions that have taken control over them. And this council has tried to address that issue, but I think everyone would agree that our solution to the problem hasn't been as successful as we'd hoped. So this is going to be an important discussion, getting us getting back on the right track. I also want to thank you for your deference and for the patience of the members of the audience, Mr. Chairman, when Mr. Bonin and I both were engaged in Transportation Committee hearing until just a moment ago, so that's the reason for our delay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Of course. Any comments from colleagues around the AKA Horseshoe? Mr. Bonin, Bloomfield? Mr. Fuentes here? Then with that, let's can we have Housing Department come up, give us an overview of the current ordinance and oh yes, I'm sorry, where's the CLA? I can't see you.
Is it with the record?
Yes.
Items
please.
1 and 2. Items 1 is a motion, Cedillo, Krikorian, Wesson, relative to a request to the city attorney with the assistance of the Housing Department, Department of Building and Safety, CLA, CAO, to prepare and present an ordinance to amend the foreclosure registry to require lenders to pay a proactive inspection fee at the time a property changes from the NOD to REO stage. Item 2 is a motion, Cedillo, Wesson, relative to a report from the city attorney on the impact of the city's foreclosure program on the U.S. District Court ruling against the city of Chicago.
Okay. Housing. Welcome. Thank you.
Welcome. Good afternoon, Council Member. My name is Roberto Aldalpi. I'm the Assistant General Manager for the Housing and Community Investment Department. As the Council knows, this was an ordinance pursuant to a Garcetti motion that was requested back in February of 2009. It instructed the CLA to come up with a framework for a foreclosure registry in order to deal with the blight and the nuisance properties, creating a registry that required banks to provide contact information so that we would know who to contact in the event to correct blight and correct the violations on the property. The CLA report was released back in November of 2009, and an ordinance was signed by the mayor back in June of 2010. The issue, when the ordinance was originally enacted, it required the banks to register with the Housing Department at that time. It required them to come up with contact information in order for us to determine who we need to contact in order to deal with any violations that may exist to curb the blight and the nuisance properties. The issue that we had initially with this registry was that it also allowed an option for the banks to register with what's called MERS, Mortgage Enforcement Registry System, and it's a national registry that has the registrations of all banks. What we found early on that we were having difficulty with the data that MERS was providing to us. It was an ordinance requirement and allowed an option for them to do that. It got to the point where we came back to council in 2000, I believe it was in 2012, to ask the council to allow the elimination of the MERS requirement and requiring the banks to directly register with the housing department. Since then, what we have done is develop a registry that allows the banks to register with us at the NOD stage, the notice of default stage. The challenges that we found with that was, as the folks know, that foreclosures is a fluid type of system. It can change from day to day. We were able to finally be able to contract with a data vendor whereby we can get that information in order to identify which properties that were at the NOD stage. Unless there's any specific questions as to the motion, that's a kind of a brief overview of the registry itself.
Okay. Talk about how many properties are currently in the registry, and then how many do we think are out there that are not? Which is
Helen Morales will be able to provide that to you.
Okay. Currently, we have a total of 33,664 properties that have been registered with the ordinance since its inception. Currently, this year, we have 5,163 properties that have registered with the foreclosure registry.
So the first number is the aggregate number, and the second number is the current year?
Yes.
Okay, and the first number was 33,000?
33,664.
Okay. And then the other question was, do you have any way to have a sense of how many are out there that may not be in the registry?
Currently, this year in 2014, we've collected the data, and we have approximately 1,800 properties from 2014 that have not registered. The problem with identifying those properties is we'll have to do a property search on each and every property to determine, for example, if there was a loan modification that was done, if there was a notice of rescission that was done. And the problem with that is that they've recorded them in the name of a lis pendens as opposed to a notice of recession. So systematically, it creates a problem to be able to identify the transaction, the property transaction. And because of MERS and the toxic title that MERS created in the securitization of properties, it really requires an analytical review of each property before we do anything to identify whether or not they're in non-compliance with the ordinance.
And just by way of an add-on, what we've determined, our data is showing from quarter 4 of 2012 to quarter 4 of 2013, there's been a 63% decrease in the notice of default filings. In addition, from quarter 4 2012 to quarter 4 of 2013, there's been a 62% decrease in the actual foreclosures filings.
That's huge. So talk to us about the programs that you have to do outreach and help people navigate through this. And are those reduced numbers part of that effort, would you say?
I think it has to. I think it has to do with the recession being limited at this point in time. I think it has to do with some of the measurements that are taking place. I think banks are being somewhat more responsive to fixing their properties. We've seen when we contact banks that come to our attention, since we have the contact information, we're able to contact them and put them on notice that they may be subject to inspection. Just by way of information for this body, the Housing and Community Investment Department, we handle all multifamilies in the city of Los Angeles. Single families handled by our city family from the Department of Building and Safety. Our scale is about 760,000 multifamily units in the city of LA. So we take care of foreclosures by virtue of our core services, either through a systematic code enforcement program or a complaint-based program. The single families and the vacant multifamilies are handled by our folks at Building and Safety.
Let me ask you about about our motion here, and it states that the report should include the amount of fines that could have been collected from these properties, along with a plan of action on how to notify the banks of the $250 per day fine moving forward. Is there any agreed upon enforcement mechanism that will enforce and ensure that the fines will actually be paid?
As I spoke in my opening remarks, the $250 per day is where the banks do not register the property with our registry. We would provide a notice to them, giving them 30 days by which to register with us. If they don't, then the $250 per day kicks in. The issue that we had with that, as I stated earlier, initially when the program was developed, because they had the option of registering with MERS, we could not track whether or not, in fact, they registered with us or they registered with MERS. The database systems were not compatible where we could query their system to see. That's why we put forward a motion with this council to eliminate MERS. Subsequent to that, the elimination of MERS in 2013, January, we had some challenges with the type of data, and I'll talk to my systems director in terms of being able to address that. The third part of it, however, is that, as the folks know, and that's on the agenda for today, there was a case out in Chicago where their foreclosure registry was challenged on preemption grounds, and I'll defer to the city attorney to talk to you about that. So we were kind of waiting for the outcome of that case, which just came, I believe that case was settled in April of this year, and I believe the city attorney has released an opinion subsequent to that, and again, I'll defer to them. But as I stated earlier, the fluidity of foreclosures and the complexity with understanding at what foreclosure stage they're at requires a lot of work, and I'll defer to my Director of Systems to talk a little bit about that. I should say, however, that when this ordinance was enacted, while it gave $155 registration fee, it did not come with authorized positions. Because we were under a mandate and instruction back in 2009, when the framework from the CLA was developed, we were instructed to implement this program. Some may believe that the program was implemented too late, because the height of the foreclosures was around 2007, 2008. But nevertheless, we were asked to develop this program. We did. We used existing staff to develop this registry. What we didn't expect was that there was going to be an overwhelming response to this, that the banks were going to register. Part of it was because when the ordinance was enacted, we did outreach. We did trainings with banks, realtors, and assets managers to come to the department to talk about this foreclosure registry, what the requirements were, and what the consequences of failure to register were as well. We did an email blast to as many people in the banking industry that we could find. So while we thought that was part of our outreach program, we didn't think there would be an overwhelming response. When we found out there was, we were still initially and I will admit that we were at paper and pencil. When we found out that we were at a stage where banks were registering, we had to get a little bit more sophisticated and develop technology where we did develop an online registration system as well as an online, which we amended later, payment system where they can pay online, which is where we're at right now. We think we have a handle on it. But just getting back to the $250 per day, I'm going to defer to Mr. Kung to talk just a little bit about that, if I may.
Good afternoon, Council Member. Greg Kung, Director of Systems Housing Department. Just to give you an idea of the data challenges that we have, Mr. Al-Dapi mentioned earlier that before the elimination of MERS, when we allow property lenders to register either with the Housing Department or with the MERS system, there was no way for us to know. There was not an easy way for us to know what property was registered with. Well, we knew what properties were registered with us. There wasn't an easy way to find out what properties were not registered with MERS. Basically, we had to go to the system and look it up one by one. We were not afforded the export of all the data from MERS to do that analysis. So it was a one-by-one process. So that did not allow us to pursue fines and penalties for properties that did not register with the Housing Department registry. But since the elimination of MERS in 2013, we could then start to look at possibility of issuing non-compliance and then pursuing penalties and fines. But it did take us a while to establish a contract and do data analysis with data vendor. So the first time we got the data that we could use was in June of 2013. Since then, we came across further challenges with data because we know when the NOD property is not registered with us, we do not have enough information to know whether that property was subsequently rescinded from NOD or whether any other action has been taken place to that property that has removed it from the foreclosure process. So to find out whether that property is still subject to the registry and subject to any penalties and fees, we had to do half the process is systematic, where we could use the data that we purchased from data vendor, and then half the process is still very manual, such as Ms. Morales had mentioned earlier. We had to go into each property and look at its records to see whether there has been any loan remodification, rescission of NODs. So it's been a challenging manual process. So to this date, we've identified upwards of 500 properties that we have confidence in the data of, that it is indeed in the foreclosure process and has not registered with us, and we are ready to send we are ready to pursue those if they no longer register with us within 30 days. And that also, in addition to that, we were also, as Mr. Aldapi mentioned, that we're waiting for the city attorney's opinion on the Chicago case and to see what impact that has on our registry fee collection process.
Just by way of add-on, the Chicago case has to deal with the Fannie and Freddie properties, and so we wanted to kind of be careful with that until that decision came out, and talk with our city attorneys to assess, to see whether or not we can assess the $250 per day to Fannie and Freddie because of the preemption argument.
And might I add also, the significance of MERS and the significance of the Chicago case is really held up the process, because all the literature out there suggested that 80% of all loans are backed by one of the government-sponsored enterprises, be that Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, or Federal Housing Mortgage Association. And so when we looked at this at first, we thought, well, there was 80%. That's a huge number. And so it gave us reason to pause in any further action at that point in time until we got the determination regarding what was going on in the Chicago case.
Good afternoon. I just want to try to get a little finer point on the state of the list right now. There's 30-some thousand is the cumulative total that have registered. What was the number that you gave?
33,664 since the inception in 2010.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So of those 33,600, those were registered at the time of the filing of a notice of default.
That's correct.
So what is the subset of that number that have actually gone forward into foreclosure?
Those numbers I don't have. We can get those numbers for you. What's very interesting is 83% of all properties register more than 2 or more years, which means that it's taking from NOD to foreclosure time at least 2 years before those properties are sold to a third party. Now, they may be sold, but they may be sold because of the securitization. They may be moved from MERS to another bank in order to foreclose and ultimately get to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac because the property is secured by them. So it takes some process to get to that point. So we're seeing that of the properties that are registered with the foreclosure registry, it has been consistent, even though the properties have decreased as far as NODs filed and foreclosures filed. Consistently, they remain in the process because from NOD to time of foreclosures, we're knowing from the data that we have from the City of LA in the foreclosure registry, 83% of the properties register with the foreclosure registry for 2 or more years.
And so once that transfer is complete, let's suppose there's a short sale, or it's sold to the foreclosure is completed and it's sold to a third party. Then, what's the process by which those properties are removed from the list?
There is a deregistration process that we go through. So the bank comes forward, or the representative who's registered the property, and provide us with the information. With the grant deed, we require that's being sold to a third party, and we deregister the property. So we do have statuses of properties that have been deregistered, and we could get that to you if you'd like.
Okay.
I don't have that number with me today.
So that's fine, but I'm just trying to understand it conceptually. So of the 33,000, some portion of those have not yet advanced beyond the notice of default stage to an actual foreclosure, and they have not yet become an REO.
That's correct.
And some portion have progressed beyond that point and have been sold to a third party and are now subject to delisting, decertification off of the list.
Right. The problem with that is we're relying on the banks to come forward and deregister those properties, and sometimes they don't come forward and deregister the properties. And so the only way for us to really know that would to take each property and conduct a real property search on that and see whether or not there's been a grant deed or there's been a sale to a third party other than a bank, other than REO status. And so that's something that systematically cannot be done. It has to be done electronically. So we're on reliance on the banks to come forward and to deregister those properties.
Okay. So just if concentrating on the front end of that process for the moment, the notice of default stage of it, at the time that there's a notice of default that's registered, a struggling property owner is still the title holder of that property.
That's correct.
And a financial institution has no control over that property at that point, correct?
That is correct, and I think that's something that the attorney is the city attorney's office is opining on today.
Yeah. So, I don't know if this is something I can ask in open session, but the first thing that struck me when I realized that was the status of some of these properties is, these are public documents, I assume. The list is a public document, is it not?
Yes. Yeah,
So are there consumer privacy issues that are implicated by the fact that a homeowner who's in danger of losing their home is now subject to being listed on our foreclosure registry before the bank takes their property?
I would defer to the city attorney on the question of liability, Councilmember.
I'm not so much asking about liability. I just, want to make sure that we're in compliance with privacy laws and making sure that we're not putting a struggling homeowner in a worse position when at a time that we're trying to reduce the number of foreclosures and clean up neighborhoods. I also want to make sure that we're not putting an undue burden on the shoulders of the very person who is engaged in that struggle to try to retain their home. So how do we strike that balance, given that this is a notice of default registry as much as it is a foreclosure registry?
If I can come back with that on a report back, I would like to consult with the city attorney in terms of the privacy issues.
Okay.
For the benefit, I guess, I'll consider myself a new member here. I read about this program. I think with the exception of Mr. Krikorian and Mr. Englander, all of us were not here for the inception of the program. And the briefing here, I think, is sort of helpful in terms of speaking to the history of the program. But I want to ask a very basic question, only because it seems to me that this is now a very complicated and at points, this is my opinion, ineffective from an enforcement perspective program. And so I'm just sort of wondering out loud, what is it that this program is intended to do from your perspective? Because notwithstanding the Chicago complication and the different sort of buckets of money now that we're going to have to account for what was pre-Chicago, meaning 3 years or older, that is within our capability of using, not counting the monies that potentially, according to the city attorney's memo here, are potentially problematic if we try to exercise in a certain way because of the Chicago briefing. I mean, I see a real mess here, and I'm just wondering, what is the intention of this program from your perspective?
I think from the department's perspective, the intention was to develop a registry of contact information for the bank, so that if we had a problem property, that we would be able to find a local contact that would be able to resolve it. Notwithstanding the fact that within the ordinance it has an enforcement component to it, the enforcement part, if you ask me, the department, the enforcement part is, I believe, is what's necessary in this part. We collect the information, we collect the contact information. The enforcement piece, and I'm not going to speak, the Department of Building and Safety is here, but I think the enforcement part, or a mechanism by which to get an inspection program going for a single family. Again, we handle the multifamilies. But in terms of the single family, I believe the challenge has been funding that enforcement program so that the single-family nuisance properties can be abated. But in regards to the registry itself, our charge was to collect this information and then provide it to to not only Building and Safety, but Department of Water and Power, which we're talking to in terms of to avert utility shutoffs. And we've also talked with the council member Englander's office, and we arranged a exchange of information where the LAPD can come to the registry and get data information in terms of to fight the criminal element that he spoke of. And so we had plenty of meetings with our systems folks and their systems folks, and now LAPD has access to our information. Because I think the challenge that they had, particularly out in the valley, was that they did not know who resided in those vacant properties. And so they have access to our information for that matter.
And if I can add, the statistical data, currently the reason for at notice of default, and this is something that not only the City of Los Angeles did, 442 other municipalities did the same thing and had the same ordinance at notice of default. And the reason for that was, as I explained earlier, we have 83% in the registry that filed for 2 or more years before the property is foreclosed. Now, properties become vacant. Most properties become vacant, and this is historically on research that I've conducted, between the time of the NOD and 6 months after. And that's the time the property becomes vacant. So now we're talking about having a piece of property that's vacant for 2 years or more. And so the reason for the NOD was to be able to identify a person that we could contact. And it's been useful. We have had people contact the individuals who registered on the property. Just recently, we had one out of the Hollywood Hills. Attorney called us. We were able to get them connected with the right people. They got somebody out there to avoid an issue that was happening at that property. So I think that is the reason for the ordinance. That is the reason at the NOD time, is because it stays at the REO stage. We understand that there's the legal liability now. We have somebody we can go after, right? Because they're the owner. We can't go after the current owner that's living there. But we do need to have an identifiable person that is going to be able to go out there and at least give our constituents that information, because those properties are held vacant for all that time period. And so that was the reason originally, I believe, for the NOD process.
And that's helpful. So, and again, I don't have a position one way or the other should have been the NOD or some other moment in time, but the City of Los Angeles, I wasn't here for this, but they chose the notice of default as that moment in time where they would begin the registry. And I think, you know, from a policy perspective, I understand what the goal is to sort of hopefully anticipate the vacancy and understand if there's a way for us to keep somebody accountable to the property. And if it does get foreclosed on, then we would certainly have somebody to keep accountable to the program. But I guess where I'm frustrated is that then the City of Los Angeles didn't appear to fund the Department of Building and Safety to be able to actually do any of the enforcement, which I think is sort of the policy design here that is completely missed. The intention is to make sure that these problems don't get exasperated as a result of the vacancy and the sort of the period of time where there isn't any real clear accountability because of the ownership sort of being in transition from owner to bank. And I guess that would be okay if we did something to remediate the issues at these sites. But it seems like in 2011, at least by your history here, we didn't, I'll say the city, because I'm not going to claim responsibility just yet for this, but the city of Los Angeles didn't fund the Building and Safety Department, and as a result, it seems to me that we've got a list that is maybe complete, because there isn't any real, at least from what I heard in responses to the previous questions, we can't be certain that this is a complete registry. So we have a somewhat complete list, and we've got a list on which it appears that at least for the single-family residential, which is largely, I think, the challenge in most of the city and certainly in my council district, where we didn't act on the information. And then I think what's even more frustrating, for me at least, is that we have $3.5 million sitting in an account that potentially can't be exercised to remediate or address any of these issues, with the exception of maybe doing a new fee analysis to figure out what it is that Building and Safety may or may not do at some point in the future. Never mind that the crisis was in 2007, 2008, and we're in 2014. So I'm just sort of wondering out loud, where do we go from here? Because to perfect a program that maybe legally, because of the Chicago case, is suspect potentially, and I don't know, this is for the city attorney, and maybe this is a closed session sort of question, but to sort of perfect a program that hasn't been working, I want to figure out how to address the issues in my district. I've got tons of these homes in my district, and I don't know that having a list that's sort of complete with some funding that I can't touch and haven't generally funded the staffing for Building and Safety to remediate the problems is satisfying to me. So what do we do?
Councilman Fuentes, I do appreciate that, and I think that is our frustration as well, is because in everything that we've seen, we're only as good as we can enforce our ordinance. And so we do need to have that enforcement mechanism, and that does come with having Department of Building and Safety go out there and enforce this ordinance alongside with the registry. So it has to, you are correct, it has to be two. And so we are proposing that we do amend the ordinance to include the inspection enforcement mechanism from the Department of Building and Safety.
Because, you know, it's good to know that you're sharing the information, but the situations that I've had in my district, I didn't wait for or look up in a registry the problem house. I heard from neighbors. I figured out how to get a condemnation by the fire department using our existing health and safety codes, and then we vacated the property and secured it because we pushed the departments to do that. So that's how we've been doing it. I want to be able to use more tools, and I don't know that this tool is ready to be used. And I don't know that we should be spending an awful lot of time trying to perfect it if it's going to be potentially problematic from a legal perspective. I don't know if the city attorney's office is here, but if they've got suggestions from an ordinance perspective on how it is that we can sharpen, well, let's add teeth and then sharpen those teeth to get it to work, because I mean, I don't know what it is that we're doing here if we're not going to exercise this tool.
For the CLA, I believe, has released a report in terms of a proactive inspection program, which we were participating in that. So I would defer to the city CLA on that issue, because it does need a proactive inspection.
Is this the one where you all recommend doing a fee analysis to understand if we can use the fees collected to be able to fund this proactive code enforcement?
Not utilizing the foreclosure registry fund, but generating a new inspection fee to fund that program, yes.
Okay. I guess, you know, again, it's 2014, and the market isn't anywhere near where it needs to be, but it's on the mend, and we're seeing activity in the district. And I'd hate for this thing to be ready to go in a year's time, and there's no real need for it because the market has corrected itself. I mean, I just, what recommendations do you have for us today to act to make this work?
You know, actually, when you speak that foreclosures are down, that is correct. Foreclosures are down. However, everything that I have read and going forward, what is anticipated to happen is a lot of these properties have obtained loan modifications. And the loan modifications, they were gradual increased payments. And the lenders are expecting, and forecasters are expecting, that in this year and next year, we're going to see an increase again as a result of those loan modifications that have reached their third year tier, and people are going to be in foreclosure. Additionally, we've seen a lot of the registered properties have been foreclosed by different people, different times, multiple times. And so that being said, I think going forward, it will still be a good mechanism for the city. I do agree that foreclosures are down. However, I don't think the problem is over.
Okay, well, at some point, Mr. Chair, when we do go into closed session, I've been advised that the questions I've got are more for closed session.
Yes, that might be the appropriate venue. Are any other questions from other members before we hear from the public?
Just a quick question, and I share the frustration certainly in the 9th District. Suffers from a great number of foreclosure, abandoned properties, and it's just been a real point of frustration trying to keep track and trying to do something about. But you mentioned that there are about 1,800 properties not on the registry. Where'd you get that number from, or did I mishear it? 800?
There's approximately 1,800 properties that we've identified as having filed an NOD and have not registered with the registry.
I see.
That does not mean that they may not be required to register, because we have to do an analysis to see whether or not there was a lis pendens or a notice of rescission that was filed subsequent to that NOD that would then make their non-filing with the registration valid.
These are all single family, or?
I don't have whether or not they're single family. I can get that information to you if you'd like.
If there's a breakdown by district, would like to have that also. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Bloomfield.
There are a lot of municipalities that have been having the same issue. Could you give us an idea of where we are in relation to other municipalities? San Bernardino has heavily impacted. Have any of these other cities come up with a working solution?
Most of the cities have, in conjunction, an inspection, proactive inspection, along with the registration. And those seem to work very well. And so that's, I think, where we need to be, is in that arena.
I mean, are there lessons? It's been out there for a while. They've been doing it for a while. Is there anything? Is that where we're headed? Is that what you're saying?
I think we are. I think the item number one, the motion to fund to require an inspection fee to fund the proactive inspection program, I think that's before the body today.
So what happens to the money that's already there?
The money in the foreclosure registry?
Yeah.
There's a couple of issues with that. The first issue is whether or not we can go back and pay the general fund, because these were fully funded positions. What didn't happen to transpire was that we're looking at to see whether or not we can go back and pay the general fund monies. The second part is the pool of money. We're waiting for the Chicago case to come out to see whether or not we would be liable for any of those fees in those cases that were Fannie and Freddie related.
So the 80% of cases, you're saying theoretically we could be liable, and then all that money would have to be returned. The 3.8, 80% of that would have to be returned.
I would opine on that, but I would again defer to the city attorney for a definite opinion on that.
Ready for public testimony. Thank you so much. Before we'll go to public, and then we'll go to a conversation with the city attorney. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we hear first from, I'm going to call it 4 people. I've got Ms. Graham from CityWorks USA. Gloria Debs Mann. Gloria Debs Mann. Carlos Marroquin. And Megan Nikilik.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This comment for both items number 1 and 2.
Okay. Please proceed.
Thank you. Hi. If it wasn't for my love for the city of Los Angeles, I wouldn't be here. Unfortunately, I just heard about the LAHD, the plan that you guys just spoke about. I'm against it 101%. The city right now is undercoming one of the largest lawsuits against LAHD or HACLA, whatever the new name is, and I find that it's compromising the integrity of the city. We call them in the real world Gestapo, criminal elements, crime elements, and etc. So I think that it would be a liability to go against that. And your inner thought, Mr. Krikorian and Mr. Fuentes and council, because you guys know and you know in your heart. I found that they have coerced and manipulated the bankruptcy and the issues, forcing private homeowners and people into manipulated situations. And as a country, we're trying to grow out of it. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mann.
Hello, my name is Gloria Desman, and I'm against this proposal because I thought it would do something to have banks, maybe a proposal to help banks help homeowners stay in there 2 years and rent to them maybe at a little lower rent so that the place won't be vacant. But as far as I know, Building and Safety, because I work for the city, and I work for Building and Safety, had an abandoned property section that handled abandoned property with the city attorney's office. So I don't know where this registry is going to help, except that you're going to start having people pay inspection fees for single-family dwellings. And if you're not renting, what is housing? If they deal with multi-units, why are they going to be involved in single-family dwellings? Once again, sir, I know it may not be, but it sounds like the middle class is shrinking very, very quickly, and affordable housing is becoming non-existent in the city of L.A. But for single-family dwellings, I think that they should be left with people, and you should help the people find a place, the banks, to help rent to people after they get foreclosed. Thank you.
Thank you. Carlos Marroquin.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm speaking for this amendment, and as a homeowner advocate, I see so many families that continue to come to us in crisis. Our communities are in crisis. The media is no longer talking about foreclosures, but we know that they're still out there. The courts are full of homeowners trying to save their homes. It is necessary, it's important that we continue to find solutions, and I think this is a good solution, that something needs to be done and enforced to make sure that the banks, are held accountable for what they're doing to our communities, our cities. City of Oakland and Riverside are already collecting money, and I think that LA should set an example and be aggressive, make sure that the banks are in line with our communities and stop taking advantage of and every opportunity against our people. Thank you.
Megan Nikili, Megan. Okay, let's hear from Sarah Mitchell, Valley Industry and Commerce Association, please. Followed by Ruben Gonzalez, followed by Peter Coons, and followed by Angelina Jimenez.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Sarah Mitchell with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. Some of our members include several of the high-profile banks who predominantly act as servicers of the loans, not the direct lender, and have very limited legal rights to manage the condition of these homes. Our banking members are fully committed to complying with this proactive registry program and willing to pay the fee determined by the city for initial inspections. However, the city must keep in mind that this is not a sustainable revenue source to fund staff positions. As the economy steadily recovers, foreclosure rates will continue to decline. Additionally, if the city intends to require internal inspections, it must be responsible for determining whether a property is occupied or vacant. Neither lenders nor servicers have the right to enter homes that are still undergoing the foreclosure process. one which on average occurs over 18 months and can last more than 5 years, as lenders, servicers, and residents try to prevent foreclosures. The banks are committed to maintaining our communities and helping people remain in their homes, which should be the ultimate goal of the city initiative. If implemented irresponsibly, the city could become responsible for forcing faster and more frequent foreclosures. We look forward to working together with all the stakeholders.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a member of the committees, my name is Ruben Gonzalez here on behalf of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. As Sarah said, we all agree here on the why. The banking industry, as well as the city, we want to keep folks in their homes. And if we come to a point where we can't keep them in their homes, then we want to make sure that our communities aren't blighted and that our properties are safe and again, not a blight on our neighborhoods. What we're talking about is the how. And there are just so many questions that have not been answered that we need to answer before we move forward with anything. We need to see if the ideas that were thought of in 2009 still make sense this much later. We need to talk about when makes sense for these charges to the banks to come through, because an NOD is not, it's a starting of a journey, it's not the end of a journey, and no one quite has laid out what makes the right point for this to happen. Also, if you're hiring inspectors to enforce this, what is going to happen when you have an ever-shrinking amount of revenue coming in as the foreclosure pie gets smaller? Please think of all these issues before we put anything in place. Thank you very much.
Hi, Peter Coons with ACE, and there's two, strongly in support of the proposed amendments to the ordinance. There's two reasons why, and I think it's illustrated by the house that probably everyone has seen in the LA Times on 111th Street. That was a great example of why this ordinance isn't working. With regards to the problem with the registry, the proposed amendments really help take care of that by getting the city to actually start going after banks that don't register their properties, of which this house was a great example. Regarding the problems with proactive inspection, we need a proactive inspection program, and that's obviously what these amendments do, is it creates a funding source for the proactive inspection program that frankly should have been with the original ordinance 4 years ago. With regard to the legal issues, you're going to hear from some folks right now that establish that the city actually does have the legal right to do everything that's being proposed. And I think it's too bad that the Chamber and the other big business groups that are representing the Wall Street banks want to make this sound like this is complicated. This is not complicated. Other cities have done this for years. It's time for the city of LA to do it as well.
Angelina Jimenez.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Angelina Jiménez y les vengo a contar una pequeña historia.
Good afternoon. My name is Angelina Jimenez, and I'm here to tell you a brief story.
Estuve cuidando una casa que es mi casa vecina para mantenerla limpia.
I was taking it upon myself to clean up a house that was next to my own house.
Yo parqueaba hasta mi carro para que pareciera la casa que no estaba abandonada.
I would even park my car in the driveway to make it appear as if it was not an abandoned house.
La cuidé por 2 años, esperando que la ley que pasó hace 4 años, la ciudad llevara a cabo la multa sobre los bancos.
I did this for over 2 years with the hope that the city would start enforcing its law that it's had in place for over 4 years.
Hasta el momento no llevaron a cabo la multa, entonces hoy la casa, gracias a Dios, ya se está vendiendo.
The bank that owned this house was never fined, but thank gosh, or thank God that now the house has finally been sold.
No solo vengo a reclamar, también vengo a dar las gracias al señor Cedillo porque al final hoy parece que tenemos una luz en el camino, pero ojalá que esta promesa no pase en otros 4 años, porque en 4 años vuelvo a venir.
I'm not just here to fuss at you, though. I would like to thank Councilmember Cedillo for finally putting a light at the end of the tunnel. However, I hope that this does not end up being something that we continue to hope for the next 4 years. If so, I will be back.
Esta ley de la multa sobre los bancos en Oakland ya está pasando. No entiendo por qué en Los Ángeles no se puede hacer.
This law to regulate bank-owned properties is working in Oakland. I don't understand why in LA it can't work as well.
Y les prometo volverlo a recordar si no se lleva a cabo. Muchas gracias.
And we'll be back, but thank you very much.
Reverend Jonathan Mosley, Beverly Roberts, John Howland, and Richard Rucker Trapp.
Good afternoon, Council, and to this great city in which I love and was raised. It's embarrassing to find out that we can't come to some kind of resolve into making this situation what it should be. That we continue to meander around, going around and listening, especially when we all know the consequences of what has happened with these predatory banks and what has occurred. I've been there myself to see, to smell, and to deal with the just deplorable condition. The city, this is Los Angeles. This is not somewhere in far away land. This is our city, and there should be something that the city should be proactive in doing and making sure that these houses get properly treated. All of these poor people that have been put out and have been left out to be cast out like they're nothing, and then you have all of the things that go on, the crime and all of the things, something needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Beverly Roberts with ACE. And for the past 4 years, we've been working on this very same thing. And I have to do it in my perspective because I live in these communities. I live in the communities that's being hurt. And like the young man said, he got frustrated with some of the things these people were talking about up here. Think about how frustrated we are living in those communities like that. And what we need to do is, like the other people said, like Oakland and Riverside, do something about this. And the thing to do is, and I thank you, Don, I'm not fussing either, but I want to say this. You need to vote yes on this ordinance to move it forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm John Howland with the Central City Association. I won't reiterate my colleagues from VICA and the Chamber's points, but I will ask you to take those under advisement. There's been a lot of talk about what's been going on, what's been done, and what's not been done. And I encourage you to keep the door open to discussions with the banks. With our CCA has a number of the banks involved in this as our members. They want to convey the message that they want to continue to work with the city to find solutions to this outside of the courtroom if possible. And their ultimate goal is, like everybody's goal in this room, to end blight in the community, to keep people in their homes, and to resolve these issues. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Councilmember Cedillo and council members for introducing this measure. My name is Rashad Rucker with Community Coalition, also partners of the Fixed LA campaign. Community Coalition, we service the areas of Council District 8, 9, 10, and the upper levels of 15. And we've been working on this issue with blight for quite some time. And we've seen how it has torn apart communities and have devalued a lot of our communities within, especially the South LA area. So we definitely encourage you to pass this measure, but make sure that this measure has the teeth to really go after those banks and holding them accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Simboa Wright and Francesca Perez.
Good afternoon. As you know, my name is Simboya Wright. I work for the city. I also live in the city. I own property in the city. In 2010, that's when the ordinance was set out. Just think about the revenue that the city can bring in. $1,000 a day wouldn't hurt these giant banks, corporations that makes billions, while they're throwing out residents that's barely making it, and they're getting rides, easy rides by. They have all the money and they get by. But residents, neighbors of mine, are being put out in these properties. They don't even take care of the properties. The homeowners association, I have no idea what plans they have, but I know as a resident, as a taxpayer, as a voter, this doesn't make sense. You can fund the program with $1,000 a day. Thank you.
Eli.
Mi nombre es Francisca Pérez, vengo de la ciudad de Pacoima y mi distrito es el señor Fuentes.
My name is Francisca Perez. I'm from Pacoima, and Mr. Fuentes is my council member.
Y yo quiero decir en esta hora que sí ocupamos el programa del cual ustedes están hablando, porque en la ciudad de Pacoima se dice que no está, pero sí está. Yo vivo cerca de un vecindario que las casas están cerradas y lo que está pasando ahí es que se está entrando el vandalismo, los borrachos no tienen casas y van y hacen desórdenes ahí. Entonces, ¿quieres...? Sí, perdón.
So she said that some people think this isn't a problem in Pacoima, but I'm here to attest that it is and to strongly support the proposal because I've seen a lot of areas in my neighborhood where there's houses that are abandoned and people hang out there drinking and things of that nature.
Y también lo que necesitamos es que no hayan más recortes y los recortes pasan al día. Por ejemplo, que yo digo en lo particular que queremos que no hayan recortes de policías, no hayan recortes de ancianos, los programas de los niños tampoco, no queremos esos recortes.
And we also need there to be no more cuts, for example, police or other services that we depend on. There's been a lot of cuts in that area.
Y sí queremos, como les digo, ese programa que ustedes acaban de hablar. Gracias.
We would like to support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Eli Nadaris Weissman.
Good afternoon.
Beverly Roberts, 1 second, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Eli Nadaris Weissman. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Rothner, Siegel, and Greenstone, and I'm speaking on behalf of the coalition to Fix LA. I'm speaking generally to encourage the city to enforce the ordinances it has passed to the full extent of the law and to not needlessly shy away from amending the law to meet the goals set out. My remarks are directed at the judicial opinion from Chicago that has been mentioned here today, and I will not be able to summarize it in the time allotted. I ask for your indulgence to speak an additional minute or so. The case at hand is Federal Housing Financing Agency versus Chicago from the Northern District of Illinois, which was issued in August of 2013. I'd like to note that case ended in a non-monetary settlement with no liability from the city and Freddie and Fannie agreeing to voluntarily comply with the registration requirement. A few points I want to note about it for your consideration. That opinion, of course, is not binding on any entity in the state. It is only binding in the District of Illinois. It is the opinion of one judge, and there's no basis to conclude that it would be binding by a federal judge here. On its own terms, the decision does not apply to Fannie or Freddie in their capacity as owners of property, only in their capacity as holders of a mortgage interest. That should be clear. That is important to note. The preemption analysis that has been discussed is extremely broad and in conflict with traditional notions of cities' police power as well as authority to regulate land use. I don't think the city should believe that that decision will be replicated here. I have two other points I'd like to make. That decision, of course, even on its broadest interpretation, does not apply to properties not held by Fannie or Freddie, and there's no legal impediment to immediate enforcement as to those properties. Lastly, I would just like to emphasize this is a policy question in the absence of binding legal authority. It is really a policy question of how the City Council believes it should enforce its laws. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Let me thank all of you. We have listened to all of you. Those are all the cards. We've listened to all of you, and now we have to move into closed session because of the legal implications that are involved with respect to this case that was just brought to our attention. and we want to see how we should move forward. At this time, as we go forward, we'll go into closed session first to hear from our city attorney. Is that
The
right?
committee will now go into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 Sub D2 to confer with their attorneys regarding anticipated litigation.
That's up to you. Yeah. We're going to take action today. In session, we are pleased to hear clarity from our city council and our city attorney. We are prepared to move forward on the motions that are before us. We need a roll call from both committees.
Correct.
Okay.
Starting with the Housing Committee, Councilmember Cedillo on items 1 and 2.
Cedillo, aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me. On item number 1, Councilmember Cedillo.
Cedillo, aye.
Councilmember Fuentes on item 1.
Aye.
Councilmember Price on item 1. Councilmember Blumenfeld on item 1. And Councilmember Bonin on item 1.
Aye.
And Councilmember Blumenfeld and Councilmember Bonin are for Budget and Finance. And for item number 2, Housing Committee members, Councilmember Cedillo.
Aye.
Councilmember Fuentes.
Aye.
Councilmember Price. And for item 2, Budget and Finance Committee, Councilmember Blumenfeld.
Aye.
And Councilmember Bonin.
Aye.
Both committees have passed both items 1 and 2 unanimously.
Note and file on item 2. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do we don't note and file on item 2?
The motion, the item before the committee on item number 2 is the motion. And I'm sorry, what is the committee's action?
Correct, that's what I'm asking.
The committee can either adopt the motion or
Did we just do that?
receive and file it.
Receive and file.
But are they adopting both motions?
Mr. Chair, is the committee's intent to receive and file item number 2?
Correct.
Okay.
Can we move on to item number 3?
Item number 3 is a city attorney report based on the case City of Los Angeles First Advanced Development and Investment.
That requires us to go into closed session?
Yes, it does.
Move.
Session, sir.
I'm sorry?
Take public comment before we go into closed session.
Can we take, are there cards? I don't have cards on it.
We only have cards. We've taken public comment on items 1 and 2. We have general public comment if the chair wishes to take that.
I want to address item number 3. Can we,
Yes, sir, we can go into closed session.
let's go into closed session on that? They haven't turned it. Just let it go.
Yes, sir. If you do not want to go into closed session, you feel you have sufficient information, it is the committee and the chair's decision as to whether or not to go into closed session. What is the chair's desire?
Members?
There are
Okay, we're prepared to go forward without closed session.
One moment.
The committee's action on item number 3 is to approve this item?
Yes.
Okay. That leaves general public comment if the chair wishes to take that.
General public comment? Anyone? No? Thank you for your attention and time in the City of Los Angeles.
We need to vote technically on item 3.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
I don't want us to get a technical problem, but I think we need to technically vote.
Oh, correct.
Number 3?
Roll call on item number 3, please.
Yes.
Thank you. On item number 3, Housing Committee members, starting with Councilmember Cedillo.
Cedillo, aye.
Councilmember Fuentes. Aye. Councilmember Price. And Budget and Finance members, Councilmember Blumenfeld.
Aye.
And Councilmember Bonin.
Aye.
Both committees, Housing Committee and Budget and Finance Committee, have unanimously approved item number 3.
Thank you. I see we've addressed all matters on the agenda. I see absence of public comment. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.